You might not be seeing it in your town just yet, but major U.S. cities are starting to feel some tremors of a pretty significant economic shift.
Yeah.
And it's starting to show up in, of all places, major layoffs.
That's right. And what's really interesting is that for a lot of people, these changes, they haven't been super obvious.
Right.
It's not like a sudden crash. It's more like a gradual kind of change that's been slowly gaining momentum.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics then. We're seeing these layoffs starting to hit some of the biggest cities in the U.S., especially those known for tourism and a high cost of living. So think New York City, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Right.
Even places like Miami, Dallas, Houston, Las Vegas are feeling the squeeze.
Yeah.
So have you noticed any changes in your city yet, maybe while traveling? Let us know in the comments. And if you're finding this discussion interesting so far, don't forget to give us a like.
It's a great question, and those personal experiences really help to illustrate what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, there are a few key reasons why these cities are being hit first.
All right, let's hear them. Why are these cities at the front of the line?
One major factor is the decline in tourism.
Okay.
Take Las Vegas, for example. Hotel rooms and rental cars are way cheaper compared to last year. And even those iconic casinos, they aren't as packed as they used to be.
That's a pretty big change. Didn't Vegas see a huge boom in tourism not too long ago?
Absolutely. It was a prime example of that post-pandemic travel surge. But now with inflation and economic uncertainty on everyone's minds, people are being a lot more careful with their spending.
Right.
And unfortunately, those big splashy vacation destinations, they're often the first to feel the effects.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tourism is down, but what else is adding to these urban layoffs?
Well, another big factor is the exodus of tech jobs. We're seeing people leave these major tech hubs for all sorts of reasons.
Okay.
Whether it's high taxes or political climates, immigration concerns, whatever the reason, this outflow of talent, it has a ripple effect on those local economies.
And it's not just the big tech companies feeling the pinch, is it? What about the impact on smaller businesses?
You're right. It goes way beyond the big players. Think about the street vendors in Los Angeles who rely on the crowds around sporting events. Many of them are disappearing. Even Seattle's iconic Pike Place Market is feeling the effects. A lot of those smaller vendors who really brought the market to life are gone now.
So we're starting to see this contrast emerge between how corporations and small businesses are handling this changing economic landscape. Kind of a tale of two cities, as they say.
Exactly. Large corporations usually have the resources to adapt and ride out the wave, while those small businesses, unfortunately, are much more vulnerable to these kinds of shifts.
Interesting. And what about all those now hiring signs we see everywhere? Are those even legitimate anymore?
That's where things get a little tricky. A lot of companies are putting up those signs simply to gauge interest, but they're not actually filling the positions right away, almost like they're testing the waters, waiting to see how things pan out before they commit to actually hiring.
So it's more of a we might be hiring situation?
Pretty much. It's a smart strategy for businesses, but it definitely leaves a lot of job seekers in a state of limbo.
I bet. Okay, so we've talked about businesses, but what about consumers? How are our changing spending habits playing into all of this?
Well, it seems like people are starting to reach their spending limits.
Okay.
We're seeing a pretty noticeable decline in overall consumer spending, and it's showing up in some pretty surprising places.
Like where? Give us an example. What are people cutting back on?
Think back to that report about Valentine's Day spending we mentioned earlier. Initial projections were around $27 billion.
Wow.
But the actual spending turned out to be closer to $14.3 billion.
Whoa, that's a huge difference. So maybe people are skipping the roses and fancy dinners this year, choosing to stay in?
Maybe not entirely, but it definitely shows that consumers are being much more selective with their spending.
Right.
Instead of those big, expensive outings, it seems like many people are prioritizing things like home improvement projects, paying down debt, or maybe choosing more affordable local alternatives.
Makes sense. So instead of that big trip to Disney World, maybe it's a day trip to a local theme park.
Exactly. It's all about finding ways to have fun and enjoy life without breaking the bank. And what's really fascinating is that this shift in consumer behavior, it's actually giving people a lot more leverage than they realize.
Leverage? How so?
Well, for a long time, it felt like corporations could just keep raising prices and consumers had no choice but to accept it. But now it seems like Americans are realizing they have the power to push back, and they're starting to exercise that power.
So it's like a collective enough is enough kind of moment.
Precisely. We've seen this with the recent backlash against price increases from companies like Amazon, Disney Plus, and YouTube. Consumers are voting with their wallets, and companies are starting to take notice.
So maybe this economic shift is less about a full-blown recession and more about a fundamental power shift between businesses and consumers.
That's a great way to put it. It's a recalibration of the balance. And here's the warning. This trend is very likely to spread.
Spread, you mean outward from those major cities?
Yes, we expect to see these shifts move from major cities to the suburbs, state capitals, even popular tourist destinations. And what's concerning is that millions of Americans may not be prepared for the potential job losses and an economic hardship that could follow.
That's definitely a sobering thought. So what can people do to prepare?
Well, the first step is awareness, which is exactly what we're doing here. Understanding the forces at play is crucial. From there, it's about being proactive, reviewing your finances, exploring alternative income streams, and having open conversations with your family about potential adjustments that might need to be made.
It sounds like we're heading into uncharted territory.
In many ways we are, but even amidst uncertainty, there's always opportunity. This economic shift is forcing us to rethink our priorities, be more resourceful, and find creative solutions. It's a challenging time, no doubt, but it's also a time for innovation and resilience.
Absolutely. And hopefully by understanding these trends, we can all be a little more prepared for whatever comes next.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, as they say. The more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate these shifting economic waters.
So let's do a quick recap of what we discussed so far. Layoffs are starting in those major U.S. cities, but we expect the ripple effects to spread outward, driven by these changing consumer habits and economic pressures. It's a bit of a wake-up call for all of us to pay attention to these trends and think about how they might affect our own communities.
You got it. And remember, this is a constantly developing situation. We'll continue to monitor these trends and bring out the latest updates.
Right.
So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out.
And speaking of staying informed, if you're finding this discussion helpful, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Let's spread the knowledge and help everyone stay ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. The more people we can reach with this information, the better prepared we'll all be.
Now, here's a final thought for you to consider. How might these economic shifts affect your local economy, job market, or even your own spending choices in the near future? It's something to think about as we all navigate this evolving landscape.
It's a great question and one worth pondering, because while these shifts are starting in those big cities, they have the potential to touch all of our lives in one way or another.
That's right. Thanks for joining us today as we explored this crucial topic.
Our pleasure. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And remember, even amidst uncertainty, there's always opportunity. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
We'll see you on the next one. It really is uncharted territory for a lot of folks. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about a specific metric that really underscores these changing spending habits we've been discussing.
Okay.
The Consumer Confidence Index.
Okay, I've heard of that, but remind me, what does the Consumer Confidence Index actually measure?
It essentially gauges how optimistic people feel about the current and future state of the economy.
Yeah.
It takes into account things like their job security, their views on the stock market, and their overall willingness to spend money.
So the Consumer Confidence Index is high. It means people are feeling good and ready to open their wallets.
Exactly. And right now, that index is showing a downward trend.
Oh.
This reflects that growing sense of caution among consumers. They're less confident about the future, and as a result, they're tightening their belts and reconsidering their spending habits.
So how does this tie back into that idea of a power shift between corporations and consumers?
It's all connected. When consumers become more cautious with their spending, corporations can no longer just assume they'll buy whatever's put in front of them.
Right. It's not enough to just slap a now hiring sign out front and expect a line of eager applicants anymore.
Exactly. And it's not just about jobs. Consumers are also becoming more discerning about the products and services they choose. They're more likely to compare prices, seek out alternatives, and even voice their dissatisfaction if they feel a company isn't meeting their needs.
So what you're saying is that this economic shift is giving consumers more leverage to demand better value and hold corporations accountable.
Precisely. Consumers are realizing they have a voice and they're using it.
Yeah.
We've seen this play out in a number of ways, from boycotts and negative reviews to increased support for smaller local businesses that align with their values.
So it's not just about saving money, it's also about making more conscious choices about where that money goes.
Absolutely. And that shift in consumer mindset is forcing corporations to rethink their strategies. They can no longer rely on old tactics like simply raising prices or offering superficial discounts. They need to demonstrate genuine value, prioritize customer satisfaction, and in many cases become more transparent about their practices.
Now, you mentioned earlier that this trend is likely to spread beyond those major cities.
Right.
What might that look like in the suburbs, state capitals, and even those tourist destinations we talked about?
It's really about understanding how those ripples spread outward. For example, as tech workers leave those expensive city centers, they often relocate to more affordable suburban areas. This influx of residents can drive up housing costs and put pressure on local resources, but it can also bring new opportunities for small businesses and entrepreneurs who cater to those changing needs.
So it's not necessarily all doom and gloom. There's potential for positive change as well.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those opportunities and adapting to the evolving landscape.
Okay.
Think about those consumers who are choosing to stay closer to home and explore local alternatives.
Right.
This creates a chance for smaller businesses to shine, offering unique experiences and building strong connections within their communities.
Okay, so we've seen how this shift is impacting big cities and starting to trickle down to surrounding areas. But what about those tourist destinations? How might they be affected?
Tourist destinations are particularly interesting because they rely so heavily on discretionary spending. As consumers become more price sensitive, they're going to be more selective about where they travel and what they do while they're there.
So instead of that week-long, all-inclusive resort vacation, maybe it's a weekend getaway to a nearby national park or a charming bed and breakfast.
Exactly. Destinations that offer unique experiences, affordability, and focus on value are likely to fare better in the shifting landscape. Think about agritourism, ecotourism, or even those quirky roadside attractions that offer a glimpse into local history and culture.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the decline in tourism and the tech exodus to the impact on small businesses and the shifting power dynamic between consumers and corporations. It's clear that this economic shift is multifaceted and far-reaching.
It really is, and it's important to remember that this is still an evolving situation. What we're seeing now is just the beginning of a much larger transformation that's likely to unfold over the coming months and years.
So what can our listeners do to stay ahead of the curve and navigate these changes effectively?
The key is to stay informed, be adaptable, and embrace those opportunities for innovation and creativity.
This is where our listeners come in. Have you noticed any shifts in your local tourist spots? Maybe fewer crowds at your favorite restaurant or shorter lines at the amusement park? Share your observations in the comments below. And while you're there, if you're finding this discussion as insightful as we are, be sure to give us a like.
Those personal anecdotes are so valuable. They help us all understand the nuances of this economic shift and how it's playing out in different communities.
Okay, so we've talked about how to stay informed, but what about being adaptable? What does that look like in practice?
It means being willing to adjust your plans, explore new options, and think outside the box. For example, if you're concerned about job security, maybe it's time to update your resume network with people in your field, or even consider acquiring new skills that are in high demand.
So it's about being proactive and taking control of your own future.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to get creative. Maybe it's starting a side hustle, exploring the gig economy, or even launching your own business venture.
That entrepreneurial spirit can be a real asset in times of change.
It absolutely can. And finally, don't underestimate the power of community. Connect with your neighbors, support local businesses, and share your knowledge and resources.
It sounds like navigating this economic shift is all about being informed, being adaptable, and being part of a supportive community.
That's a great way to put it. It's about recognizing the challenges, but also embracing the possibilities.
I like that. Okay, so we've explored the causes and consequences of this economic shift. But what about the bigger picture? Where do you see this all heading?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It sure is, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think we're at a pivotal moment. The decisions we make individually and collectively over the next few years will shape the trajectory of our economy for decades to come.
That's a powerful statement. So what can we do to ensure the trajectory is a positive one?
It starts with understanding the interconnectedness of everything, from consumer choices to corporate practices to government policies. Every action has a ripple effect.
So it's not just about what happens on Wall Street or in Washington. It's about what happens in our own homes and communities.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in shaping a more sustainable, equitable, and resilient future.
Okay, so we need to be informed, adaptable, community-minded, and recognize the power of our own choices. But what about that final piece you mentioned, the one about embracing opportunities for innovation and creativity? How does that fit into all of this?
That's where things get really exciting. Constraints often breed creativity, and this economic shift is forcing us to think differently, challenge assumptions, and come up with new solutions to old problems.
I love that perspective. So instead of seeing this as a time of fear and uncertainty, we can choose to see it as a time of possibility and reinvention.
Exactly. This is a chance to rethink the way we work, the way we live, and the way we interact with the world around us.
So from remote work and the gig economy to the rise of sustainable practices and the growing emphasis on localism, there are so many opportunities emerging from this shift.
Absolutely. And it's not just about new technologies or business models. It's also about rediscovering the value of human connection, community building, and finding joy in the simple things.
That's a beautiful sentiment. Okay, I'm feeling a lot more optimistic after that, but I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear what you have to say next, so let's jump into part 3.
All right, let's do it.
So we've talked about the need to be informed, adaptable, and embrace those opportunities for innovation.
Right.
But what does that actually look like in our everyday lives? What are some tangible things people can do to navigate this economic shift effectively?
It really comes down to taking action.
Okay.
And that action can take feel forms depending on your individual circumstances and goals.
Okay, so walk us through some examples. What are some specific steps people can take?
Well, if you're feeling uncertain about your job security, maybe it's time to proactively update your resume and LinkedIn profile. Take some online courses to enhance your skills or get certified in a new area.
So it's about investing in yourself and staying marketable.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of networking. Reach out to people in your field, attend industry events, and let people know you're open to new opportunities.
That's great advice for anyone, really, regardless of the economic climate.
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to cultivate your professional network. Now, beyond career considerations, it's also a good time to take a close look at your personal finances.
Okay, what should people be focusing on there?
Review your budget, identify areas where you can cut back on unnecessary spending, and maybe explore ways to supplement your income.
So maybe that's picking up a side hustle, selling some things you no longer need, or even finding creative ways to monetize a hobby.
Exactly. Think about your skills and passions and see if there are ways to turn them into a source of income.
And for those who are feeling a little more adventurous, maybe it's time to explore that business idea they've been putting off.
Now is the perfect time to be entrepreneurial. Think about those shifting consumer needs and preferences we discussed. There are so many opportunities to create products and services that cater to those evolving demands.
So whether it's launching an online store, offering freelance services, or even opening a brick-and-mortar business, this economic shift could be the catalyst for some amazing innovations.
I truly believe that. And remember, you don't have to go it alone. There are so many resources available to support entrepreneurs, from small business incubators and mentorship programs to online communities and crowdfunding platforms.
And don't forget about the power of community. As we mentioned before, connecting with your neighbors, supporting local businesses, and sharing resources can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. This is a time to come together, support each other, and build a more resilient future.
That's a great message to end on. Before we wrap up, though, I just want to remind our listeners to subscribe if they haven't already. We'll be continuing to explore this topic and share valuable insights as the situation develops.
We'd love to have you join us on this journey. And as always, if you enjoyed today's discussion, please give us a like and share it with your friends. The more people we can reach with this information, the better prepared we'll all be.
That's right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the evolving economic landscape. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And remember, even amidst uncertainty, there's always opportunity. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.
We'll see you on the next one.